Hi, I'm Jim Bowen at Central Piedmont Community College's Culinary Technology program, and we're here today to talk about the chef's knife, our proper use and techniques for cutting and slicing and dicing and taking care of business in the kitchen. We want to talk primarily about our chef's knife, and a little bit about our paring knives too, probably our two knives that are going to be our most useful in the kitchen and used most often. With our chef's knives, we have a variety of different construction type of materials to look for. We need to talk about balance. We need to talk about the actual material that we use, they use in the construction of making the knife as well. The long and the short of it is that you actually need to put the knife into your hand to make sure that you're comfortable with both the balance and the weight. We do have a variety of knives here that are available to us on the market. This is what we call a fairly genetic kitchen knife. Our polycarbonate handle, which is dishwasher safe. It's very easy to maintain. But one thing you notice is it does have a little different look to it in terms of the blade moving through the handle. The tang is hidden. The tang is the back section or the back stamped part of the knife that tends to give us additional balance in our handle. Parts of our knives, we have the back, the heel, and in some cases, such as a couple of our knives we have here on the table we haven't talked about yet, a bolster. And then inside of the handle we call the tang. This one has a rat tang, that is what we call a molded tang. Tip, heel, cutting edge. That's real similar things that we'll find on all of our knives. This is a wonderful knife. You run things through the dish machine. It's a good utility knife, but doesn't have a lot of weight to it. You'll notice that a couple of our other knives, if we pick them up and look at them, we'll notice that this has a wooden handle, not a composite handle. It's riveted. And if we look at the back of our handle, we'll notice that the back edge or the tang of our knife runs all the way through the handle. And this is called a fully tanged knife. It tends to give us a little bit more weight in our in the handle section. But you'll notice that this knife does not have a bolster, such as our other two knives that we have down here. These two knives are what we call stamped steel. And in the production part, we just take, in the manufacturing process, there's just a sheet of steel that's stamped out. Then the handles are shaped and cut additionally, and the handles are dropped on them or molded onto the knife. There's nothing wrong with those knives. They are just a little different manufacturing process. When we move to our forged knives, we will usually notice that they are what we call bolstered. They tend to have a little bit more weight to their handles. And you'll notice that not only do we have a bolstering here with our forged knives, but we have an additional area that where the metal itself will apply or give us additional weight in the handle. And you'll notice that we have that available to us in a couple of different lengths as well. I have a knife here that, although the tang runs partially through the handle, does not run all the way through. And this again is our rat tang styled knife, but again you can see that. A lot of our new knives that are coming out are what we call a solid construction, where it's all metal. The handle is molded as well as right into the handle is molded as part of the construction of the knife. Again, this type of knife is one that is very easy to keep clean, can usually go through dish machines without too much trouble. We start talking about cleaning and washing. Those that have the riveted type handles, generally, we don't like to see move through a dish machine or left soaking in any type of water. Just as a rule for knife safety, we usually don't like to put knives in water and walk away anyway. We hate to reach our hands into soapy water and bring out a bloody stump. That's not always a good idea. Our paring knives, you'll notice with our paring knives, or the smaller knives, we have the same type of molded handles that are possible. We also have the forged style knives also that are available to us as well. Again, it's a matter of personal preference as to whether they feel comfortable in your hand, whether you can work well with them. One of the things that we do want to talk about with our knives is the way they talk to you, the balance and their tone. When we pick a knife up, we're going to talk about how to hold them properly when we begin to do our cutting. And usually we grasp the knife right at the bolster or at the heel area. So we like to set our finger there right at that point and see whether or not the knife has a equal balance in the handle, just above the handle and all the way down the cutting edge. If I move my finger back on this knife, you can see that we're weighted a little more heavily in the blade area. My center point is a little bit far, or a little bit advanced of the bolster or the handle area. Now that's not a challenge if you like the length of the knife and you're comfortable working with it, that's not a problem. But most of our knives that are well forged have a balance point right at the bolster. And when I say listen to your knife, one of the things that you want to listen for is if you pick them up and at the balance point, let them bounce on the table. And you'll notice that each one of these knives has a very distinctive ring or sound to it. The metals are made up of different composite materials. As we start to get to those that have a little higher carbon content, the ring or the ping begins to become a little higher pitched. And we'll find that usually those that have that higher ping or pitch to it tend to sharpen a little bit easier, but they're a little softer. Again, it's a matter of personal preference as to how often you need to sharpen your knives and how you take good care of them as well. I'm Jim Bowen with Central Piedmont Community College at the Culinary Arts program. Thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again. Hi, I'm Jim Bowen with Central Piedmont Community College's Culinary Arts program. We're here today to talk about our knife skills, and particularly at this point we want to talk about taking care of your knives, some knife safety rules, and how to sharpen them and get them prepared to do a good job in the kitchen. Knife safety rules. I guess your mom always told you not to run with sharp objects, so obviously in a kitchen environment we want to make sure that we walk with our knives. Generally, if we're moving from point A to point B, we want to always make sure that our knife tips are downwards and always pointing away from our body as well. Don't leave them in soapy water. Don't leave, when you're finished with them. That's when you wash them and clean them and dry them and remove them to a safe and secure area. Transportation, here at Central Piedmont, we use toolboxes and students transport their tools back and forth to class. Most of our students will also have knife guards on all of their blades. It does a couple things. Number one, it protects you from reaching your hand into a toolbox and grabbing a sharp area. And it also helps prevent that edge from being turned, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, or being flattened by bumping up against other pieces of metal and other knives. When we're working with our knives in the kitchen and we're working, if that knife happens to be knocked off of a countertop, please don't try to catch your knife. Step away from it. Step back, let it fall. A knife is much easier to replace than a finger or toe. And just be careful. We shouldn't be knocking it off the table to begin with, but if it does decide to fall, if something happens, please step away from that. A couple of things about our knives. We want to make sure that they're sharp. We want to make sure that they're sharp because one of our safety rules is a sharp knife cuts your food products much easier and it tends to cut you less often. Again, number one, it takes a little more force to cut properly if you have a dull knife. So if we have a sharp knife and we use it correctly, we'll actually have many fewer incidences in the kitchen. So I want to talk about how to sharpen a knife. Most often in a kitchen environment, our tri-stone is what we'll use, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. The truth is that there are a lot of other types of sharpeners on the market that are automatic that can be used in a kitchen. This is a tried and true one that if you get a tri-stone or a bi-stone, that's a stone with two sides instead of three. If you have that in your toolkit and the ability to sharpen your own knives, take you a long way down the road. One of the things that I'm going to do before I begin to sharpen my knife is place a damp towel underneath this little sheet pan so that this doesn't slide around at all while I'm working with it. And we'll notice that with our other knife safety issue, when we begin to set cutting boards up, that a damp towel under your cutting board will also prevent your cutting board from sliding. So a damp towel is something that we will use most often in the kitchen for all of our, to secure all of our cutting surfaces and our working surfaces. They call this a tri-stone primarily because of the 3 different grits that are on our stone. 1, 2, 3. This particular stone is an oil stone. We have a vat of mineral oil, which is a food-grade quality that's in the bath that keeps the stones wet. If you choose not to use mineral oil, please do not use a vegetable oil. Our vegetable oils will oxidize, break down fairly quickly, and destroy the integrity of the stone. If you choose not to use an oil, you can use water, but oil is a much better product and usually recommended for this type of a stone as well. We're obviously going to start with the coarse, work our way from the coarse to the finest, to the medium, and then to our finest stone. There is a number along the edge, or a coarse label, a medium label, and a fine label on the sides of this particular stone. And what we're going to actually have to do is wear away the edge a little bit in order to make sure that we get it to a sharpness or desired sharpness. How do I know when this knife needs to be sharpened? I do need to actually drag your finger across the edge. We don't want to apply a lot of pressure. All we're looking for is the amount of drag that we get, or the resistance that we get pulling our knife or our thumb across the edge of our knife. If you were to take the back edge, you'll notice that if I pull my finger or my thumb across that edge, it slides fairly easily. And the sharper the knife is, the more drag that you get. What's happening is that very sharp or thin edge of metal is actually trying to capture or drag our fingerprints. We can get this awful sharp, so it actually offers quite a bit of resistance. So that's what we're looking for, is that resistance. Most of our knives, in order to get them sharp, we need to weigh the metal at an angle of approximately 18 to 20 degrees. Depending upon the thickness of the edge of your steel, and the manufacturer, they will tell you when you purchase it at 18 degrees, 20 degrees. Easy way for us to figure that out. So my knife right now is at approximately a 90-degree angle to the stone. If I half that, it's about 45. If I half that again, it's about 22 and a half. So I need to just drop that edge down just a little bit. If you have any doubt, you can simply take a piece of paper, fold it from one corner, that 90-degree corner, to a 45, fold it again to a 22 and a half, and you can lay that on your stone, and you can see that that is approximately what we're going to use here. Stone that I have here is about 9 inches long. I could have a stone that's 6 inches or 3 inches long. The trick here is that no matter what size stone that we have, we want to try to wear the whole stone and wear the whole edge of the knife equally. So I do not want to just sharpen my knife on one part of the stone. We want to sharpen the edge of my knife along the entire edge of the stone. I'm going to start off with just a light pressure. I don't need to apply a lot of pressure here. We're going to let the stone do the work for us. And I'm going to run my knife 7 or 8 times on one edge at the proper angle. Then I'm going to turn my knife and run it again at the same number of strokes at the same angle on the opposite side. If you get 10 chefs in the room with 10 knives and 10 sets of stones, you might find 10 different techniques. And the truth is we're all going to wear the edge of the knife at the proper angle. Some will go from the tip to the heel. Some will use a circular motion. Some will turn the knife after every individual stroke and put it to the other side. So the truth is each of those techniques work. But the one I'm going to show you works for me. And once you begin to take a stone and your knife, you're going to practice with it, and you're going to find that a technique works well for you. And then you stick with it. Even pressure, we're in the full stone with the full edge of the knife. Not a real difficult thing. Not putting tons of pressure, keeping equal, even pressure all the way down. If I turn my edge of my knife over, one of the things that I'm going to look for is that wearing pattern, so that it is the same depth or width from the edge at the tip as it is at the heel. I'm going to turn my knife over, do the same on the other side. I'm going to make sure that I wear the whole stone, the whole length of my knife. Just a few strokes. Turn to the next blade or to the next stone, and you'll notice a very distinctive difference in the sound, and that's because the grit is a little bit finer. Again, turning my knife. Again, turning your stone. And again, you hear a very distinct difference between the grits. And that's all there is to it. Now, I do have a little extra oil on my knife edge. I'm just going to try to pull that little extra oil off so that it keeps it in the well. I do have a mineral oil on my knife. I do need to get that cleaned off. I don't want to transport, even though this is a food-grade oil, it's not something that we want to make a vinegar and oil out of. I'm not finished. I have, in fact, worn the edge a little bit. I can look at it. I've worn it evenly from the heel to the tip. I've worn it evenly on this side from the heel to the tip. But one thing I do notice is that when I rinsed my edge off, I've got little flakes of my towel caught up along the edge. Well, the truth is I've sharpened this, but in doing so, that very thin edge of the metal actually begins to wear away with those last few passes that you make, so that this edge is not honed at this point. It's sharpened, but it's not honed. That's what we use our steel for. This regular chef steel is not here to sharpen someone's knife, but it is to realign the edges of our knives after we've worked with them for a period of time or after we've had them on the stone. The edge, if you can imagine my fingertips as the edge of the knife, even though just a slight amount at the end of the period wearing my knife, I will bend it over. I'll get a burr. This is what might happen if I don't protect my knife properly in a toolbox or in a drawer. It might knock up against something and actually roll the edge of the knife over. And that's what our steel is for. It's to realign the edges of our knives. Now, our traditional method for utilizing our steel is to hold it across our body at a horizontal position. Take the heel of your knife at about that 18 to 20 degree angle and pull it down the stone or the steel. Pick it up, put it on the other side, and bring it down. This will be accomplished, the edge will be cleaned up in 5 or 6 strokes. It really doesn't require a whole lot to stand there and work this for 15 minutes. That poor chef at the end of the buffet line that you see on Sundays with your family making a lot of noise, that's all he's doing. He's trying to attract attention. It only takes a few swipes for your knife to get sharp. If you're uncomfortable, there are a couple other techniques. I can turn the knife away from me and slide it down, back and forth. I can set this on the table and do this. Again, it's a matter of dragging it across the bar, not sliding it down the length of the bar to get our knives honed. Now, as I begin to pull my finger across, have a very sharp or much more of a resistance to that drag. So I was able to sharpen this knife edge fairly quickly, not a whole lot of work. Take care of your knives. They'll help you out in the kitchen. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Jim Bowen at Central Piedmont Community College, the Culinary Arts Technology Program. Hi, I'm Jim Bowen with Central Piedmont Community College's Culinary Arts program. We're here today to talk about using our chef's knife properly in a kitchen. A couple of things that we want to do before we begin cutting with our knives. We want to talk about our knife safety for a moment. I do have a nice cutting surface here, but you'll notice it's sliding a little bit. So one of the first things that we're always going to do before we begin to do a lot of knife work is we're going to secure our cutting station, our cutting surface, so that it doesn't slide on us. And most often we can do that with just a damp towel. So you know now that I've got my surfaces nice secured here. I'm going to go ahead and get my knife ready. And most often, if I'm going to be doing a lot of cutting work, one of the things that we're going to also have available is our steel. We're not going to sharpen our knife with our steel, but I'll notice that if my knife begins to drag at all, I might have a burr on the edge of my knife. And if I do have a burr on the edge of the knife, I'm just going to pull my knife down the steel just a couple of times so that I can realign the edge of the knife and make sure that my cutting edge is nice and clean. Before we begin to actually cut vegetables, what we want to do is talk about the proper stance, holding of both our guiding hand and holding of our knife in our knife hand. Now, I'm right-handed, so any of you those that are out there that are left-handed, when I say my knife hand, I'll be talking about your left and my right. I'd like to talk about the guiding hand first, and that's the hand that is going to hold my food products. That's the hand that's going to make sure that my knife edge is fed properly, rate of speed. That's the hand that's going to assure that my cutting, my vegetables or the meat or food products that I'm cutting is stable, doesn't roll around on us at all. For me, that's my left hand. Again, for you left-handers, that's going to be your right hand. One of our key things about our guiding hand is actually going to be a tool as well. We're going to make sure that my front knuckle or my front joint of my finger actually protects the rest of my hand. We're going to do that by taking my first three fingers, bringing the fingertips up equal to each other, and then I'm going to roll my fingers up and my fingertips underneath. So that once I do that, when I'm doing any cutting, this and my knife might be in contact, and if they are in contact, I can be safe because my fingertips will be tucked under. Now, right now I'm talking about my index, my middle, and my ring finger. What am I going to do with my pinky and my thumb? Well, goodness gracious. I'm going to use that to grip the food products. I'm going to use that to anchor my hand onto the cutting board and slide my fingers back. I might use it to bundle herbs, and we'll be cutting herbs at a later time. And I'll be showing you how that we'll bundle and punch and pull our products. So we'll get to the point where we use our little finger and our thumb quite a bit. But in terms of protecting our hands and making sure that we don't cut ourselves, it will be our index, our middle, and our ring finger that we will be lining up together, rolling up, so that my joint is at a vertical position or 90 degrees to our cutting surface. Cutting or gripping our knife. We see this a lot on the Food Network, and I hate to tell you this is not the right way to work. We want to make sure that we secure the blade properly so that we have control of it all the time. If I grip it improperly, such as this, or this way, that knife blade would always, if it slips, would always slip, and always the edge then would be facing my guiding hand. Dangerous situation. We want to secure that blade. What we're going to do is just in front of the bolster, or if you don't have a bolster, just in front of the heel of our knife, we want to pinch it with our thumb and our forefinger. We want to make sure that we pinch that blade, and we're going to set it down on the table, and then we're just going to set our hand on top of the handle. I'm going to use my three fingers then to grip the handle section. And you'll notice that when that happens, my hand is sitting on top of the knife or the handle. If you kind of pick this up, you'll notice that the handle is kind of sitting in between the fat part of my thumb, the fat part of the side here. There's that natural groove in your hand. So that handle is going to lay right in here. And if I'm also holding my knife at the proper angle, you'll notice that the blade of the knife, the handle of the knife, the bones of my forearm and my forearm are all in alignment. So what am I saying about that proper holding? Well, you'll notice that the knife moves across the front of my body. If I take my guiding hand, the hand that I'm going to be holding my food products with, and bringing it out here, you'll notice that it forms a triangle. This is what we call our working triangle. My body is the base, guiding hand makes one edge, my knife and my other hand. So I'm going to be working to a point, usually in line with your belly button and your nose, right in your cutting surface. Don't want to see people scrouched over here. You don't want to be hunched over at all. You'll get a sore back. If you stand properly, feet about shoulder width apart, grip your knife properly, and work properly, you'll notice that that working station will be just in front of your body. And you'll be working at a slight angle. Think of it this way. When a teacher, where you're first learning how to write, and they set a blank piece of paper in front of you, they didn't put it down so that it was a 90 degree to you. They'd always made you turn that paper slightly so that when your arm lays down on the desk and you write, it's very comfortable. So you have to do that the same way with your knife. Once you pick that up, it's this motion, it's this angle that you'll be working all the time. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to talk about, I've got a few potatoes stuck here. And we're going to go ahead and make a couple of different types of cuts with our potatoes. Our poor potatoes. We sacrifice a lot of potatoes here at Central Piedmont, learning how to cut properly. I'm going to just talk about some techniques. I'm just going to square this potato off a little bit so that we can make it a little easier to work with. And one thing I want you to notice that as I begin to slice, I'm not pushing down. In other words, I do not want to put my knife onto a food product and push. If I hear that knife slap against the cutting board, we're probably not using our knife properly. Also, having to do that, you apply a lot of pressure. And if that knife slips at all, if you're holding it correctly, it won't hurt you. But if you're holding it incorrectly, it may slip and turn on you. So what we want to begin to do is, as we start to talk about knives and how to cut, is to make sure that we begin to use the length of your knife anytime that you're actually working with one. So you notice that as I make my cut, if I do that properly, it'll be the same thickness all the way across. And I'm doing this in very comfortable in my slicing technique. And I can begin to slice, and I can begin to get a good number of cuts fairly quickly. Let's talk about the right size of cuts and different dices and julienne and bâtonnet cuts. Cutting into our dices, and that's usually what we're talking about with our more standard size cuts, usually is nothing more than a series of cross cuts. In other words, I'm going to cut and make a plank the correct thickness. Once I've made a plank the correct thickness, I can then begin to cut sticks the correct length. Once I have something the correct length and the correct width, I've got a julienne style cut, bâtonnet, allumette, julienne. Once we have those correct cuts, I can go ahead and turn them and cut them one more time and cut them into dices. Once I have the small julienne cuts, 1/8 by 1/8 by 1 to 2 inches, all I have to do is make one more additional cut, and I have a bâtonnet cut, which is our 1/8 by 1/8 by 1/8 inch dice. Let's start off with that size. If I want to have 1/8 by 1/8 by 1/8, I need to cut something that is approximately 1/8 of an inch thick. And if I'm standing properly, as I place my knife onto my cutting, what I'm getting ready to cut, the one thing that we'll notice is that as I start to slide my knife down, I should be able to see both points in the front of my cutting edge. I should be able to see both points of the food product at the back or the heel part of my cutting edge. So as I slide my knife down, I can make sure that my product is the same thickness from one end to the other. My food products, nice and even all the way across. And all we need to do then to make our julienne style cuts, I'm going to go ahead and trim this one down. I'm going to go ahead and do the 1/8 by 1/8 julienne style cuts. We'll cut our planks, then we cut our sticks. Very quickly, we've got a number of sticks. If I want to cut them to the correct thickness, I can get them all nice and even so that my sticks are all the same size and I get a nice clean look to them. If I want to make something that's a little thicker, a little heavier, or a 1/4 inch dice, I just need to cut a plank that's approximately 1/4 of an inch thick. Once I cut it a 1/4 inch thick, we begin to cut it a 1/4 of an inch our second time. And we start to get our, I'm going to trim that up. And we begin to get our cuts. Now if I want to begin to do our dices, that's very easy. We only have to move from cutting a plank, cutting a stick, to continuing at one additional step, and we get our dices. If I go 1/8 by 1/8, just a series of cross cuts. And very quickly, we can make short work out of any of our vegetables. Now you'll notice with my guiding hand, what I'm doing in the back with this bundle of sticks is one of the things that I'm doing is as I move my knife through, I'm keeping the bunch together, that my guiding hand is in such a manner as to protect my fingers, and all I have to do is continue sliding my knife down. And you see fairly quickly we can get a little stack. We can get a nice bundle of dices. Cross cuts, that's all we have to do. A series of cutting a plank, cutting a stick, then going from our stick down to our dices. Our different sizes, julienne, 1/8 by 1/8 by 1 to 2 inches long. Bâtonnet, 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch by 2 to 3 inches long. Brunoise cut dice, 1/8 by 1/8 by 1/8. Small dice, 1/4 by 1/4 by 1/4 of an inch. Medium dice, a 1/2 inch cube. And our large dice, a 3/4 inch cube. So you can see very quickly we can take a potato, we can take any other root vegetables, we can begin to really manipulate them to get whatever types of shape that we want, just through a series of cross-cutting. Remember, as we begin our setup, that we want to work at a triangle. We want to make sure that our guiding hand is in the correct position, 3 fingertips. We're going to curl them up so that our knuckle here is at a 90 degree to our cutting board. We're going to make sure that our small finger and our thumb are used for gripping and guiding and pulling. We're going to make sure that as I grip my knife, I'm going to pinch it with my thumb and forefinger. I'm going to lay my hand on top of it so that my knife edge, my handle, bones of my forearm are all in alignment, so that as I begin to do my work, it's a very natural movement. What we want to make sure is that our power and our cutting from our slicing is actually coming from our forearm. We don't really want that power to be in our hand. Okay? I'm Jim Bowen at Central Piedmont Community College. Thank you so much for joining me as we talk about holding our knives properly and using our plank and stick and dicing techniques. Hi, I'm Jim Bowen at Central Piedmont Community College's Culinary Arts program. Here today to talk about our cutting techniques that we're going to use to get our onions diced, our garlic and our ginger ready to go for our favorite recipes. Before we begin cutting, one of the key things that we're going to talk about is, gosh, my cutting surface is sliding around a little bit, and I want to make sure that I secure my cutting surface. So one of our key safety issues in the kitchen is always to secure your cutting surface. And we do that most often by putting a damp towel underneath our cutting boards to make sure that they don't slide around on us. So we're just are nice and secure. Want to make sure that I have my steel with us so that we can make sure our knife is ready to begin our cutting process. We don't have any burrs along our edge and that our knife is nicely honed. We want to talk about onions today. We seem to use those a lot in a lot of our recipes. We're going to dice and julienne cut our onions. Onions are a little bit different than our root vegetables, such as our potatoes, our turnips, or our carrots, if I want to dice them and really control the way our cut looks. And that's because our onion, like our shallots, like our leeks, or the onion family, these are vegetables that are grown in a concentric layering, and they usually have a globular shape to them. So they're a little more difficult to be a consistent size all the time unless we really pay attention to them. Most often when I want to begin working with my onions, I want to take a look at this root end. And you know what? We really don't want to cut much off. All I want to do is secure that tip, the old edge, and just barely expose the root end. I am going to slice then my edge off, and we're going to peel off all of our paper then as well off our surface. Get our onion ready to go. Once we do that, we're ready to go ahead and begin cutting this up into julienne cuts, rings if we like onion rings. And of course, onion rings are very easy for us. Once we peel our onions back, all we have to do for our rings is to slice them. Now, after I've cleaned off my onion, one of the things that we do want to watch out for is if there's any of our thin paper or these membranes, we want to make sure that they're all fairly well cleaned off because that will cause our knife edge to roll. If I want to cut rings, it's very, very simple. All we need to be doing is standing our onion up and sliding our knife down to cut into our rings. And you'll notice that as I begin my cutting process, that I am in the work triangle. In other words, my body is the base. My guiding hand is bringing my onion up into the center working area, and that my knife is in the correct alignment. My knife cutting edge, handle of my knife, bones of my forearm are all in alignment, and I have my hand placed on top of the handle. We're not cutting, we're not holding like they do on a Food Network. Not that we don't like the Food Network. Rings, very easy. I do need to prevent this from rolling around. We do need to make sure that your guiding hand does have firm control, and this is one of the reasons we want to make sure that all the papering is off the edge of our onions so that my hand doesn't slip on there at all. You can see that I'm using the whole length of my knife, slide, and I can cut rings very quickly. This works great if I'm getting ready to prepare them for onion rings, battered, onion rings for your salad or for garnishing any of your other food products. You just need to make sure that you secure your roll, you hold on to it with your guiding hand, and if we remember our guiding hand, our fingertips are together, curled up, and our fingertips are rolled up underneath so that my knife rests up against my knuckles here, protecting the rest of my hand. Rings are very easy for us to do. Just have to slide down there. What happens if I want to dice up an onion and try to be as consistent as I can? Well, the challenge with our onions that even though I'm a professional, if I were to lay out all the diced onions that I did, I probably wouldn't find that every single one matched the other one, just because of the way our onions are grown. Concentric layers, much thicker at the stem side than they are at the root end. So we have just some challenges there. However, we can be fairly consistent in our technique. If I want to dice these, we started off by just taking off the root edge. Well, I want to make sure that when I get ready to dice, I go ahead and slice my onion from the stem to the root, right through the center area of our root. We're going to make sure that this stays there, and that's going to help us. And as we look at this onion, we're going to notice how each one of our layers is much thicker at the equator in the stem area than it is at the root area. And that's just what is going to prevent us from making a perfect dice. But if we understand that, we can be pretty daggone consistent. I want to lay that onion down with the root end facing away from me. Our chef's knives, if you notice, our tips curve up. And I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to do about a 1/2 inch dice here, which means I want to go in about a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to slide my knife down. And if you notice in doing that, I did not try to cut all the way through the onion. I wanted to leave that tip, a small amount, attached. I'm going to do that again, and I'm just going to continue to slide my knife all the way through the onion, or all the way across the onion, without actually going all the way through at the root end. You'll notice these cuts that I have move all the way up to just at the very edge. Now that's wonderful. I've got these cuts approximately 1/2 inch each cut. But the challenge is I've got an onion here that also rolls around. So I need to make sure that I can go ahead and cut through those edges along there. There are many books that recommend lifting your knife up horizontally and sliding your knife. For safety reasons, I like to use the tip of my knife on the cutting board and bring your onion. And here, my guiding hand now needs to stay parallel to my knife. And what I can do is just slide my knife in about each 1/2 inch there. And here, on the other side, I'm just going to push it slightly about a 1/2 inch up each way. Now I'm already beginning to see that my onion wants to fall apart, but for the most part, it's still held together at the root edge. So we want to use that to our advantage. We're going to, with my guiding hand now, the root tip is going to be on the back side. My guiding hand, I'm going to set up, and now I'm going to begin that 1/2 inch dicing procedure and sliding my knife all the way through. As I get to that very edge where I almost cut all the way through, I'm going to lay it down and again move all the way through. Now I have just this small piece of root edge with about 1/2 inch cuts. I can dice it. And very quickly you can see I can take that onion and get myself and dice it fairly quickly. And it can be very consistent. Now that doesn't, this procedure will hold true for shallots. It'll hold true for leeks if I need to dice up my leeks. I chose to do about a 1/2 inch piece. If I wanted to do an 1/8 of an inch, I can very quickly move my knife back through. If you remember, I've got my edge of my knife is not going all the way through at the root side. I'm letting my knife do the work. I'm sliding it through the food product. Here I'm going to do that 1/8 inch instead of 1/2. I want to make sure my guiding hand is about parallel to my cuts. And you can see very quickly we can move through our onion and have our small dices. And we can do that now. If we can do that properly, we can begin to, instead of like Mom used to do it, or like they do on the Food Network, instead of cutting a ring first and then laying it back down and cutting back through it, if I have to dice an onion, I can actually approach it a little bit differently and have it diced fairly quickly and fairly consistently. Now, one of my favorite recipes, French onion soup, calls for a lot of onions. But it's not diced onions, it's a julienne cut. Now with our onions, again, for a cut like that, I want to go ahead and slice it, make sure that it's attached at the root end. if consistency is not the biggest problem, I can begin to just make nice, long, thin cuts. And you can see that for things like French onion soup, or in a soup or in a food product where consistency is not the biggest challenge, I can slice my onions fairly quickly. The challenge doing it this way is I'm going to have some slices that are much longer than the others. Those slices that come from our outer edges are going to be much longer than those that come from our inside part of our onion. So if I want to do this, that's certainly not a problem. Not as consistent as what we might want to have. So consistency is always a challenge. All it takes is a little bit of knowledge and we can knock it out. If we remember that what our different sizes are, julienne is about a 1 to 2 inch cut. I'm going to take a look at this poor onion here, and I know that if I cut from the center to the edge here, that's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And if I begin to make those cuts all the way across here, I can become much more consistent. Now I know that if I hold my knife properly, if I pinch it in front of the bolster, wrap my 3 fingers around the handle, I can control this knife much better. So here I do not want everything to stick together as I cut it, so I'm going to cut that root edge out. And what I'm going to begin to do is lay my knife down and slice towards the center at a slight angle. And you can see that as I slice, I'm also moving my onion back around. I get to a certain point, safety dictates that I lay that onion back down. And again, bring it from the center. So for consistency's sake, I now have a large number of onions that are almost all exactly the same length. So again, I can cut slices very quickly by laying my onion down and cutting straight across. If I need to be much more consistent in their size, I just have to keep in mind that I know what this onion does. I know how to cut it. Just have to be able to lay your knife down, control it, holding it properly, making sure your guiding hand is in the proper position, and cut it from the center point of the root to your outside edges. And you get a much more consistent product. And it looks something like this. A little different cutting technique there. You notice one of the things that I did is instead of picking my knife up each time and making the slide, that time I used the very tip of my knife as what we call the pivot point, so that I was able to rock the knife as I moved my way through it. It's just another one of those techniques that we'll use when we've set ourselves up properly and we begin to work. The key is that if I begin to work at an increased speed, you have to pay attention. Make sure your guiding hand is in the proper position. Make sure that you have full control of your knife. Don't let an onion be a problem for you now. I want to talk about another product that we use a lot in the kitchen, garlic. What we want to do is knock off the top, smash our garlic, remove the paper. A lot of different recipes call for crushed garlic, smashed garlic, garlic paste. Garlic is a bulb. Don't have really any layers in here. If I want just sliced garlic, just like anything else, I can use a pivot point, and I can just slide right on through there and get very quickly, get a lot of very thin sliced garlic. Challenge is some folks bite into a big piece of garlic like that, that can be a little tough for them. Mincing it, how do I go ahead and mince my garlic? Well, if I want to cut all these pieces, I can do that very easily. But I can treat it just like an onion if I want to mince it. I'm going to make sure that I hold it just like I did my onion, not cut quite all the way through. You'll notice that the tip of my knife has not gone all the way through that edge of the onion. I can treat, or the edge of the garlic, I can treat this just like a little baby onion. Bring my knife back through, and then I begin, again with my guiding hand now, I'm moving it back very slowly so that my knife edge cuts back through here to make a very fine cut. And you can see then that if I want to even get it a little bit smaller, I can just run my knife through there one more time, and very quickly I can come up with a minced garlic. A lot of times, though, if you've got a large quantity of garlic to work with, or you have several large recipes, you might want to make a paste so that you can go ahead and blend that garlic, get the incredible garlic flavor fairly quickly through your food products. What we'll do a lot of times in our kitchen environments is to coarsely cut our garlic just to begin the cutting process. And then what we'll do to release the oils and the water, we'll take a small amount of salt and we'll sprinkle it onto our garlic. Now, salt's going to do a couple things for us. Immediately, it's going to begin to draw some of the moisture out of our garlic. But I'm also going to use those crystals of salt as an abrasive for us. And what I'm going to do is lay the back edge of our knife on the table, and I'm going to begin to crush and drag my knife along the garlic pile. And what will happen now is that salt that we've sprinkled on there is going to begin to act as an abrasive, and very quickly it's going to take our sliced or minced garlic pieces and create a paste for us. And you can see how all of a sudden this pile that didn't have a whole lot of shine to it or not a lot of excess moisture, how all of a sudden, fairly quickly, all that moisture and oil from the garlic is being released, and we really got a nice shine to it. Got a lot of sugar in our garlic as well. And you see how quickly then that we can turn this into a paste. Boy, that smells good. I'm ready to eat now already. So you can see if I have a recipe or several recipes that I need to prepare for at the beginning of the day, that this might be the technique that we use so that we can go ahead and crush a large amount of garlic, paste it, and then as I begin to add this into my food products, it's broken apart, it's already released a lot of its flavors and essential oils into the paste, and as it disperses through the food, the flavor is much more enhanced. Strangely enough, we see in a lot of recipes nowadays it also calls for not just garlic, but ginger. And ginger is something that I've had students call it hairy before. It's got all these fibers in there. How do we cut those and make sure that we have a food product now that does not have a lot of fiber in it? We just have to go ahead and peel our ginger, remove the skin, and we want to try not to take off too much garlic, ginger. Any old or dried out spots we're going to cut away. And now I have something that's ready for us to process. A lot of our recipes, we don't have lots of ginger to use. It's a very pungent, very flavorful product. Again, very similar to garlic, it has a fairly high sugar and it has high moisture content. But it does have these long strands of fiber running across there. And what we want to watch out for is that the fiber usually runs the length of our product. So as I begin to cut this, I don't want to cut along the length of my ginger roots. I want to make sure that as I begin slicing, I always cut against the fiber so that each slice I make cuts any of those fiber strands into a much smaller piece. And you can see that we can, by regulating the amount or the slowness of the time that I use sliding my guiding hand back, I can slide and make very thin slices of ginger. If you've ever bitten into a whole piece of ginger like this, it can be a rude awakening if you're not expecting it. There are folks that don't care for that intense of a flavor all at one time in their mouth. They like that flavor spread out through our dish. To mince this is just a series of cross-cutting. I want to cut it into our sticks. This is a discussion we'll have about our potatoes and doing our dicing. Again, then with my guiding hand, I'm going to hold my bundle and I'm going to run back across, and I can get a nice quick mince. Or I can lay my knife down, I can smash it. Works better this way. Cut them into our nice thick pieces. Smash it. Get back up here. Then as I begin the mincing process, I've got all of my fibers are already broken apart. It smells great too. Now this is something, if I wanted to add the salt, very similar to our garlic, I could begin to do that. The challenge is that I can't break those fibers down. So if I begin to add that salt in there and work it like we did with our garlic, we end up still having a fiber string. So most often, when we get ready to do our ginger, we want to make sure that when we begin our slices, we always cut against the fiber grain. We cut it very thinly. And again, guiding hand held properly, slicing with our knife. We want to make sure that we move our knife. Notice how much of the blade I am using and how little effort that I'm putting into the slice and how thinly we can cut that. Okay. We have our paste. We have our mince. The key to all of our cutting and all of our slicing that we've talked about already today, again, is our proper technique. Guiding hand, 3 fingertips, roll them up. Proper grip of our chef's knife, make sure that our knife, edge, handle, bones in your forearm are all in alignment and you're working in the proper position. A series of cross cuts will give us our dices from our onion. We're always going to make sure that we leave our root end attached for our dicing process to help us hold our onion together. And for our slicing process, for those onions that we're not as worried about their consistency, we can just slice our onion, lay it down flat, and slice it from one side to the other. If consistency is more of a challenge or more of a key for us, we want to make sure that we actually turn our knife and work with our onion product as well. It gives us a much more consistent product. Hey, I'm Jim Bowen, Central Piedmont Community College's Culinary Arts program. Thanks for joining me. Hi, I'm Jim Bowen, Central Piedmont's Community College Culinary Arts program. I'd like to welcome you here today. We're going to talk a little bit about chopping up some herbs, chiffonade cutting herbs as well. We're going to sacrifice a little bit of parsley today. We're going to sacrifice a little bit of mint leaf today in the process as well. Parsley, one of the things we want to look for is nice fresh green leaves. We do want to wash it first, and I have washed these previously. If we can, once we've washed them, we want to always shake off that excess moisture. I'd recommend doing that in the sink if you were or nearby your sink. With parsley is one of our herbs that we do want to remove the leaf from the stem. There are a couple of herbs that's not as big of a deal. Cilantro being one of those. Cilantro is an herb that both the stem and the leaf have the same flavor. Parsley's not one of those. We want to get this washed. We want to pull and remove as much of that stem as we can so that we get primarily our leaf. With some procedures, chef will just take a chef's knife and take a bundle of parsley. You might take a chef's knife and just run it across, pulling all those leaves off. He might pick back through that, or if he's got a large amount of parsley to do, he might throw that aside. With smaller amounts, we can very quickly grab our stem, pull it through our fingers, removing our leaves. Now, one of the keys to a large bundle of herbs is we need to talk about our guiding hand. Guiding hand is that hand that does not have the knife in it. And our key for our hand here is to make sure that this is not an onion, it's not a potato. A lot of individual things are going to try to get away from us. So our guiding hand here, I am going to have to use my little finger, my thumb, kind of bundle and capture and trap a lot of our herbs into a bundle, so that as I begin to move my knife through this whole bundle, I can cut through a lot of the leaf fairly quickly. I want to talk again about our working triangle, base of your body, guiding hand, the edge of the knife should all come out to a point about in front of your belly in line with your nose. You'll notice what I'm doing with my leaves here. And you can see that with my guiding hand, I'm bundling. And you notice I'm not doing this. I'm not chopping, I'm trying to slice my herbs. And this is very important for some herbs. Basil. Goodness gracious, if you chop down through your basil, you'll notice very quickly that it darkens on you. You want to make sure that as you move through, you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm sliding my knife through my herbs, and as I'm bundling up on the back side with my guiding hand, pushing the herbs into a large bundle, then grouping it, holding on to it. And the key is to make sure that guiding hand's in proper position, fingertips turned underneath. Now, every chef or each recipe might end up having a coarse chop. It might say a fine die or a fine chop, or the term that you might hear a lot in a commercial kitchen is they want pixie dust, which usually means that they want that parsley chopped up fairly fine. And you'll notice that I'm using the pivot point. Edge of my knife is on the cutting board. I don't need to bring this up a lot. And you never ever want to bring the edge of your knife up above where the height of your guiding hand is. That's part of the process to keep my fingers in good operating condition. And you can see very quickly that I can move this herb from a full leaf down into a very small, fine blend fairly quickly. But parsley is one of these herbs that, daggone it, they're just not going to let us stop right here. I need to, because I have been cutting through this, I've been releasing a lot of natural enzymes. You'll see some of my cutting boards even turning green. These natural enzymes, left alone on my parsley, fairly quickly will make it start to smell like mowed grass. We really don't want that to happen. So with parsley, what we want to do is actually, once I have a pile of it, I'm going to wash it again. I want to wash off all that broken up enzymes and natural juices that we have. So we want to take a clean towel. In this case, I have some cheesecloth, and we want to take our chopped parsley and trap it in the center area. And then I'm going to fold the edge of the cheesecloth all around, and then I'm going to wash it. Funny thing is, I've got to wash it and then dry it. I'm going to bundle this up, and you can imagine that this is some running water, and I need to go to a sink. I need to let some water run on it. And as that water runs on there, you'll notice if I begin to squeeze this, that I'm getting a lot of chlorophyll, and you can see the color of the water here begin to change from that clear color to that green look that's being left on my cutting board over here. Now, at a sink, you want to allow that water to run, and you want to squeeze, releasing the green from your parsley, and you want to do that, might take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, but you want to squeeze it until you really don't see a lot of green being released through the muslin or through your clean towel. And once you've done that, you're going to take a bowl or a plate, and then you want to take your parsley, spread it out, and you can see how now, how that's a nice, excuse me, how that's nice and separate, how you can spread that into your dishes, and it won't clump up on you. Not only will it not clump up on you, but it also left over a day, uncovered in a refrigerator, it won't smell like mowed grass. So for chopped parsley, we have to remember, we need to do a couple of different things. We need to make sure it's been washed and cleaned. We want to make sure we remove all the dirt. With parsley, we want to make sure that we pull just the leaf off the stem. And the stem itself is something that we usually don't throw away in a kitchen. I might use it as a bouquet garni, might use it in a sachet as a flavoring agent, kind of like a bay leaf to go into my food products, to be removed at a later point. When we go to chop a bundle of herbs, you need to be careful with your guiding hand. Your guiding hand is going to be used to capture and trap. Our little finger and thumb is going to be doing a lot of that. We need to make sure that our guiding hand is in our proper position as well. We want to make sure that if I use my knife, especially if I'm using the tip of my knife as a pivot point, that cutting edge of my knife never comes up above your knuckles of your guiding hand, and that I'm always slicing through my herbs. I don't want to be chopping down on top of them. And in the case of parsley, once we're completed that process, we go ahead and we rinse off all of our excess chlorophyll and natural enzymes that we've released that will stop that natural degradation process. And once we do that, we get our nice separate leaf. And that's what we want to be doing for parsley. Now, one of our other processes that you'll see for fresh herb, it calls for a chiffonade of basil, a chiffonade of mint, a chiffonade of lettuce. And that's a cut or a type of cut that's usually called our shred cut. But the key is we want to make sure that the shreds are fine and consistent. I want to go ahead and chiffonade some of our mint that we have today. Mint leaves are usually not quite as large as some of our curly basils or some of our other lettuces that we might use. But much like our parsley that we just did, whenever we do a chiffonade cut, usually we don't think about our stems. Usually we're only thinking about our leaf sections. Again, this needs to be washed, usually dried as well. And we want to pull these guys out. With a small amount of leaves, sometimes our chiffonade cut, if you read in a lot of books, what they'll have you do is take individual leaves and stack our individual leaves up before you begin to make your cut or roll it like a cigar. We'll show that technique here, and then we'll show another technique that we'll use, especially if we have large amounts of products to cut through at one time, where stacking them individually might not be as practical. Our mint leaves or stems, again, could be used and dropped into boiling milk in order to flavor it for desserts, or used in a savory dish. But again, for a chiffonade cut, usually we're looking just for our leaf product. With a larger type of leaf, basil, stacking of our individual leaves works out fairly well. Usually instead of one great big tall stack, we'll try to actually make a little bit longer stack so that as I roll this all up, I'll actually have a cigar of herbs. Again, like our parsley, one of the things I'm going to make sure that I do is slide the edge of my knife, and very slowly I'm going to move my guiding fingers back so that as I begin to make my chiffonade cut, you'll notice that the cut itself is very fine. Okay, a very fine cut. Now with a large amount of leaves, got 3 pounds chef needs for me to do to stand there and stack them all up individually, might be a little bit more than the chef could bear in terms of having to pay for payroll. So at that time, you're just going to bundle your leaves, and you're going to begin to just roll them up, much like we just rolled up that stack, except this is a much looser, more loosely organized. But the cutting technique is going to be exactly the same. And you can see how I'm sliding my knife through here. This is very important. A chiffonade basil is something that if I chop down on my leaf instead of sliding through your leaf, you're going to discolor very quickly. So you can see with large amount of leaf, instead of doing the stack and roll, as long as I bundle them and keep them together and run my knife through properly, I can also get a very thin chiffonade cut. This is not something that we would normally then put into a cloth and wash out. Because of not being able to wash this off, this is usually not a cut that we'll do days in advance. This is usually something that we'll do as we need it, set it on up, and use it in our food products. Well, I'm Jim Bowen from Central Piedmont Community College, and I'd just like to thank you for stopping by, seeing how we do our chiffonade cuts for our fresh herbs, as well as our chopped herbs and washed herbs in case of our parsley, and our knife technique workshop. Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. We're here today to talk about some knife techniques for cutting some different vegetables. Knife techniques, so we want to make sure we have a nice sharp French knife, possibly a paring knife for a few of our items as well. Usually want to have your steel available whenever you're doing a lot of cutting work to make sure that your edge is well honed. Well, just a few cuts or a few slides on the steel there, and we'll get ourselves all honed up. And I'm ready to start cutting after I secure my cutting board. One of our major knife safety rules, we always want to make sure that we work on a secure cutting surface. And in our kitchens, most often, a damp towel under your cutting board will prevent that from sliding at all. So we'll go ahead and make sure that we have a nice secure cutting surface to work with. We've talked a little bit about cutting potatoes, cutting squares, cutting a plank, cutting a stick, cutting a dice. We've already spent some time talking about chopping and cutting and mincing different herbs. This particular moment, we want to talk about cutting some other different shapes, utilizing different food products as well. I'd like to talk about, let's talk about our peppers. A lot of times we get that sliced pepper. Well, in food service, we like to make sure that we cut things consistently. If I were to just cut this in half, take the seeds out, then begin to cut it, I'd end up getting these little boat-shaped slices. And strangely enough, a lot of those boat-shaped slices with our peppers usually don't fit on a spoon or fork too easily. They'll droop on a spoon or they'll droop on a fork. So most often we want to cut these into a very consistent size. One of our ways to do that is to, instead of cutting this directly down the center, is to go ahead and cut our pepper so that we have some nice flat pieces to work with to begin with. I can also cut that edge off, and then I have my seed pod that I can discard. Now I can begin to do slicing and dicing, and I have a product that's nice and flat to begin with. It makes my slicing and dicing much easier. If we want to have a julienne cut, and I want to be very specific to this size, the one nice thing is, well, I've got a 1 to 2 inch piece here to begin with. All I need to do for a nice julienne there is go ahead and get my pepper cleaned up. And I can just begin my sliding technique. Now you'll notice that in my cutting, that what I do have is I've gripped the knife properly. I have it pinched between my thumb and my forefinger just in front of the bolster. That as my knife sits down on the cutting station, my hand is on top, my 3 fingers are wrapped around the handle. And if I look at it, the edge of my knife, the back edge of my knife, the handle of my knife, bones of my forearm are all in alignment. So that as I'm making my slice, all the power comes from my forearm. All the work is actually done up here and on the edge. This is a safety issue. Gripping my knife properly here prevents it from moving. But this cutting technique, using my forearm as the power, actually is a long-term safety issue in that I will not develop carpal tunnel over a short period of time. Another thing that you'll notice is that if I'm using my pivot point technique, that the edge of my cutting edge of my knife never comes up above my guiding hand. Remember that poor guiding hand, I've got my 3 fingertips that are all in alignment, and then as I roll them all up, what happens is they become tucked. So that tucking procedure protects my hand and my little finger and my thumb, and I can do my slicing fairly quickly. So for our julienne style cuts with my pepper, I can move through those fairly quickly. If I care to do my dicing, I can go ahead and do that 1/8, or if I choose, 1/4 inch by 1/4, or 1/2 by 1/2 inch, and I can very quickly turn and do a series of cross-cutting. Here for the series of cross-cutting, keep in mind that if I have a large bundle of food products with my guiding hand, it's going to be my little finger and my thumb that will maintain and contain my bundle, so that as I slide my knife through the food product, I can keep them contained, and I can do my dicing procedures fairly quickly, and I can always do it safely. So you can see we get that dicing procedure done fairly quickly. Now, part of our challenge with something like a pepper, kind of like our onion again, is that the thickness of my pepper is only so thick. I have to realize that if I want to make a perfect dice, I can never do a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch dice. I can only make about a 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch dice. There are some other things that we can do if I want to make a diamond cut as opposed to a regular dice. Here is where I'll take my stick cuts, and instead of trying to cut them straight back, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn those so that as I make my cut, I get more of a diamond look to my vegetable. So this is something that we can do with our sticks. Instead of making a dice with them, we can come back across and we cut a different pattern or a different shape. And again, that can be done fairly quickly. All we have to do is realize exactly how we want to get that cut. With stir fries and our other products, there are times when we want to even change up our cuts just a little bit. And we can make a oblique style cut or cuts that are random size cuts. Again, in a stir fry or in a mixed product with pasta, it gives us different shapes, different textures to look at. And we can do that with any of our peppers or any of our pepper family. In a recipe, tomato concasse is something that we see repeatedly in our recipes. Tomato concasse is where we'll take a regular tomato. The fresher the tomato, the easier this is to accomplish. We'll go ahead and put a pot of water on the stove, bring it up to boil, and we'll go ahead and take our tomatoes off the stem. And what we're going to do before we complete it was we need to peel off the skin from our tomatoes. And what we'll do is we'll plunge just in as little meat, removing as little meat as possible. We'll cut away the stem end. Then I'm going to use my thumb as a guideline, as a depth guide. You can see that I only want to cut about 1/8 of an inch or just make enough of a cut to actually cut through the skin here. And what I want to do is go to the bottom edge and I'm going to just make either a double cross or I'm going to cut 3 times to give myself a little scoring pattern. And we'll do that with all of our tomatoes. Once that's ready and my water's at a boil, I'm going to plunge these into our boiling water. That boiling water, the temperature is going to blister all the skin. And what I'm going to do is pull them out of the boiling water, and you can see what will happen is the boiling water will blister our skin, and then very quickly I can just peel off that skin to give myself a naked tomato. And we'll do that to several tomatoes, and we'll get those ready to go. But you know what? They're not quite there yet. I have to do another thing to them. Concasse means literally to coarsely cut. And what we're going to do is, on our first cut, we're going to cut across the equator, if you will. We've got the stem and the blossom side. We want to go ahead and follow around the equator and open up our tomato to expose all of the seed pods. Once we've exposed all the seed pods, we're going to squeeze it lightly and throw out and throw away and remove all of our seed pods, so that the only thing that we have left for our concasse tomato is the meat of the tomato. And we'll just literally throw those, remove that. So here, now we're ready to do our coarse cut with our tomato. If I want to do a long thin dice or a long thin strip, we can leave it that way. If I want to do a dice, we're just going to turn it just like we would any of our other vegetables for a cross cutting and do our dice cut. So we have a recipe that calls for a concasse style tomato. What they're looking for is a tomato with no stems, no skin, no seeds, and just the meat, the section of our tomato. And this is what makes our product sweet. There's a lot of sugar that's in our meat of our tomato. The acid that we usually find in the tomato is in that seed pod, or in that juice, that structure that's all around our seeds in the tomato. The fluid that's surrounding all of our seed is where we'll find the majority of our acid in the tomato. So usually when we see a concassé, what we're looking for is that sweet meat from the tomato product. So again, our concassé, we're going to remove our, just as little as possible, the stem end. We're going to crisscross the bottom of our tomato. We're going to drop it into some boiling water until the skin begins to peel. We're going to remove it from the water, and we want to be careful. If we aren't going to use these right away, we might even want to put them in an ice water bath to shock them so they don't cook at all. Remove the skin, and then we have our tomato where we can cross-cut, and we go ahead and cut our concassé tomatoes. You'll see that. Good number of classical recipes, classic concassé tomato. So remember, no skins, no seeds, much sweeter tomato product. With a lot of our other vegetables that we have, very difficult. Let's take a little yellow squash here. This is a straight neck squash. If I wanted to dice this up, we'd end up having a food product that in the very center would only be the seed area. So with a large number of our vegetables, we're actually going to use the natural shape of our vegetable to our advantage. I might just simply cut. We'll see the word we call rondelle. In other words, we'll just use the natural shape, the roundness of a lot of our vegetables, and we'll cut circles. That's very easy to do, and we can move through a vegetable fairly quickly in cutting a long series of rounds. Very easy, but the challenge here is that we need to make sure that as I make my slices all the way across, I keep them consistent thickness. But the rounds at the end of our vegetables aren't always the same diameter as those that come from the center area. A lot of the things that we'll do to correct that, or to try to get our vegetables to a much more consistent size, might be to split and then do what we call a bias cut. And this is instead of moving my, placing my vegetable down and cutting it straight across, this is where I'm going to turn that vegetable and cut it on an angle. And here, it's much more difficult to see the difference in the thickness. We can get them all looking about the same, whether they came from the backside versus the center area. So that's our bias cut. And you can see that we can move through that food product fairly quickly. It's a fairly soft tissue, works great for our cucumbers, our green zucchini, our yellow squashes, or any of our other ones. Kind of like our pepper, if I wanted to get a little bit unusual shape to them, I can begin to turn my vegetable each time I make my cut and get these triangular or pyramid type of shapes to them. And you can see that if I were to cook these and set those up onto a plate, I get different looks to them. A little bit of fresh herbs sprinkled in with those and garlic. As I saute them, I'm going to have a little bit of interest on the plate. So we can play with our vegetables all we want with our different types of cuts. Carrots are kind of the same way. With carrots, I've got that long shape to them. I want to make sure that they're cleaned. And again, kind of like our yellow squash, a rondelle cut would be very simple. I can begin to make those round cuts all the way through my carrot, one end to the other. Round carrot pieces are wonderful, and they work great in a lot of our food products. Carrots are something that I can go ahead and dice as well if I need to dice them. And if I want to dice my carrot, this is something where I want to flatten or square my carrot so that it lays flat, doesn't roll on us. And then I can begin to cut the planks to the correct size. And this is where you want to just make sure. Carrot is much tougher than our squash, is much tougher than a potato. You want to make sure that you work with just enough product that you're comfortable with. You don't want to get too close to your guiding hand. Take your planks, cut your pieces, cut your sticks, and we can make short work out of carrots and get those into our dices. Just like in our potato cutting, if I want to do a dice, it has to be a series of planks, then to our sticks, then to our dicing. So planks work out well, dices work out well. Just like our yellow squash, there is a classical carrot, which is we call a rondelle or oblique cut. You can see what I'm doing is I'm rolling that carrot each time I make a cut. So they get a nice little pyramid shape to them. And again, this is a shape that gives us texture, it gives us height, that gives us a little bit different look to the carrot. Instead of laying flat on a plate in rounds, we've got a cut then that gives us a little bit different look to them as well. With our mushrooms are one of those member of a family, the fungus family. This doesn't have cellulose on the cell walls like a lot of our other one. It has chitin, which makes it suck up water like a sponge. So we want to be very careful when we wash it. It does have a much different texture to it. This is something where I should be able to slide a knife through fairly easily, and you can see that fairly quickly we can make short work of slices for our mushrooms. And this is certainly a situation where I can use either the slicing technique, either in a forward motion, slicing technique in a forward motion, backward motion. I can use the pivot point procedure, leaving that at the bottom. Very quickly, we can slice our mushrooms as well. Mushrooms, for the most part, we might see either sliced, or if we want to see the look of a mushroom, we might leave, again, to give us height like our oblique cuts with our squash and our carrots that we did. We might just split them in half in order to give them a little bit of height. You might give them a quarter cut in order to give them different shapes as well. Things such as orange, where I want to have orange segments. Normally what we will do for orange segments is remove just enough off the top and the bottom of our oranges to get them flat. And then what we're going to do is make one cut to expose our onion or our orange meat, and then I'm going to begin to slide my knife just at the point where the meat is met there with the pith, so that I can expose just the onion, or just the orange. And we'll go around, make sure all our pith is removed. Now in our classical dishes that will use orange segments, a lazy way to do this is to just use our knife now and go ahead and cut segments or wedges. Our more traditional method is to make sure that we remove the orange so that there's no pith. And that's when I'll use my paring knife to slide down the membrane, and we'll take out the first section. And then as I slide my knife down the next section, I should be able to hit the next membrane and slide off the next section. And this is very useful with any of our grapefruits, any of our blood oranges. This is a navel orange. Does not work as well as a technique with our Valencia style or our juice oranges, but does work well with those other oranges. And you can see that these segments will hold up fairly well to our roasting or to our sauteing techniques at the last moment. So you can see how quickly and easily we can get our segments all squared away. All right. So for our segmented vegetables, we're always going to cut between the membranes and get ourselves our sections. For our vegetables that have the different long lengths or the traditional looks, we can in fact use our dicing techniques, cutting our planks, cutting the sticks, and dicing. But the truth is we can cut our rondelles. We can cut diamonds. We can continue to do sticks and products, but our julienne-style products, but there are a lot of varieties and a lot of different ways, and these are just a few of the different ways that we can cut our vegetables. With our classical techniques, this is certainly one with our tomatoes that you'll see in a book. Concassé, again, when it says concassé, remember, we want to score our skin, drop it in boiling water, remove the skin, cut across the equator, remove the seed pods.
You jump into
meat
you jump into LinkedIn, and Jesus fucking Christ, it's like some people have like butt fuck ChatGPT just to, you know, like the content is all the same and everybody's miserable and depressed and like it just fucking drives me mental. Where places like Discord, you can have a chat to like real humans and be like, hey, how's it going? You know,
this is Jim
and, like, we all have our issues, we all have our
it's much more conversational. Like you can jump in and out of a thread and, you know,
yeah, 100%.
Not have to say hello and goodbye or, you know, none of the niceties. I don't say like, hey, how's everybody doing? You know, like when I jump in, I just write whatever crazy shit like it's on my mind.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. It's not like those like YouTube videos where it's like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" and all that fucking bullshit. Like, just be you. Like, just have a bit of like a spine and just. Ah, dude, it's weird. Like, I've been in this game for way too long, and I've built way too many massive audiences, and I just don't like people. Like, I mean, there are certain people I like, but I just don't like the way the world is